Judith, do you want to get us started?
Yes, good to go. All set?
I think we can start. Sounds good.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're very happy to have you. We're here with the North Atlantic Coast Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit, one of 17 throughout the nation, as you probably all know. Today it is my honor to turn the meeting over to the new director of the Coastal Institute. The University of Rhode Island serves as the host for the NAC CESU, but in addition to that, the Coastal Institute, which is an institute that's located on the both on the Kingston campus of the university as well as on the Narragansett Bay campus, where the Graduate School of Oceanography is located. Both of those places have a Coastal Institute, something that serves the university as a whole. And we have a new director of the Coastal Institute who will now be serving as the director of the NAC CESU. I should tell you right now, though, that we are recording this meeting for the benefit of those who were not able to attend, so it can be put on the NAC CESU website and be available to all of you. I'm very happy to see you all here. There are a number of new people serving as admin associates, as well as people serving as technical representatives. And we're happy to welcome those new folks. Obviously, for a number of people, there will be areas of catch up to be done. There is a document that will be, Jackie, correct me on this, will be on the website that we put together that gives you a very quick outline of the responsibilities of the administrative representatives as well as the technical representatives. So that is something that will be talked about at a later point. But it's worth reading through everyone's responsibilities because it will be very helpful for those of you particularly who are new to the positions to get caught up on exactly what you are expected to do and so forth. Obviously, things changed a little bit during the pandemic. And, you know, we had some very interesting processes in terms of communicating with each other. So it's nice to be, it's going to be very nice to be back to normal. In any case, the new director of the Coastal Institute is Elin Torell, who is a remarkable person. And rather than spending a great deal of time going through her bio, we need a lot of time to get through all of the agenda of this meeting. What I'm going to do is suggest to you that you can go onto the Coastal Institute website or also onto the to the NAC CESU website, and you'll be able to read about her and about the work that she does and has done, which is extraordinary. It's been globally placed work that she does, particularly in supporting women who are in developing nations dealing and struggling with environmental challenges. So she's a terrific person to take over with the leading of the Coastal Institute, and I certainly wish her well and wish you all well working together. I'll miss the NAC CESU a great deal because I think it's one of the best organizations in design and intent for the use of taxpayer dollars. So thank you all for your support of what we did together, and I wish you all the best going forward. So Elin, let me turn this over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judith. And I would really like to thank Judith because she's a personal mentor to me, teaching me and talking to me about not only how to run the Coastal Institute, but about the CESU and so forth. So I always appreciate her personal help. And I know as she was the Coastal Institute director and the director for our CESU, you know, she did a lot of work for our CESU, but also for the larger CESU community, serving on various committees and so forth. So maybe Tom, when he gives his remarks, he can say a few words about that. So yeah, you're welcome to look me up on our website and see, about my research background. I think one of the good things about my previous experience that I can bring to the CESU is that I have been managing federal grants for the last 20 years or so, bringing in, I think, probably with my team over $100 million in grants to the University of Rhode Island. So I'm familiar with federal grants processes. So I think that's a good thing. But I am very new to the Northeast. So even though I live in Rhode Island and have lived here for a long time, this is a new community for me. So I look forward to getting to know you guys. But now I'd like to introduce another new team member, which is Brian Mitchell. So Brian is our new NAC CESU research coordinator, and he took on the position in October. So he's actually, I think he's even newer than me. Well, sort of. So Brian lives in Atlanta right now, and that's also where he grew up. But I think Brian is a really great person to be our coordinator, because not only does he really love, the outdoors and nature and plants and just doing outdoor activities, but he's lived and worked and done research all over our Atlantic region, being in Rhode Island, in Maine, in New Jersey, Vermont, even doing a stint in California. So he's been all over, and I think that's really great because he knows our area and what it has to offer, and knowing it from a personal experience, from research and so forth. So I don't know what else to say, but we look forward to having Brian come up and move here to Rhode Island with his wife and 2 kids later on this year. And I look forward to working with him. So we'll be the pair, I guess, that you may hear from, and as well as Jackie, who helps with a lot of coordination behind the scenes. And sometimes, I'll send emails, she'll send emails, and maybe sometimes you might even hear from Brian. So Brian, welcome.
Thanks. I think I'm off mute. Yeah, I really appreciate that, Elin, and it's really great to be on board with the CESU. Yeah, so I work for the National Park Service, and my official title is Research Coordinator for the North Atlantic Coast CESU. And in that role, I'll definitely be continuing to work with many of you on a lot of different things. And, we'll talk a little bit more. I have a lot more time on the agenda later, so I won't talk too much right now other than to say thank you so much. And yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to getting relocated up to Rhode Island in a few months. Once we get the kids through the school year and get the house set up for sale and all that fun stuff. But now it's actually my pleasure to introduce Tom Fish. He is our national CESU lead with the National Park Service. And Tom, I think you've got some updates on, give us some national CESU perspective and other updates. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. I do have some slides to share if that would work. Can I just select that from the screen? Okay, give me 1 second here. So are those slides showing now?
Mm-hmm.
You get like an introductory slide. All of these sharing platforms are a little bit different. So where I think something's going to show up on my screen, it doesn't oftentimes. So anyhow, thank you for the invitation, for being here, and I'll give some remarks about the program and some updates. And then hopefully leave some time for questions if you have any. And just a bit about the image. I've been trying to find some interesting historic images in the public domain when I'm doing different CESU meetings. So this is from Mount Desert Island from 1864. up in Acadia. So I'm at the National Program Office at the U.S. Department of the Interior. The office is hosted by the National Park Service and has been since the beginning of the program back in 1999. The National Program Office is really the kind of liaison to both federal and non-federal partners and all the 17 CESUs for partner actions, 5-year reviews, annual support funding, development of program policy, coordinating the interagency council that is the governing body for the program and such. So just a brief show of the map. So I have the North Atlantic Coast CESU highlighted in red up in the upper right, but we have 17 regions that encompass all 50 states, insular areas, the District of Columbia, and we have some partners also in Canada and Mexico. And there are some active conversations right now, for example, in South Florida Caribbean, to engage other partners from the Caribbean Basin. On the West Coast, engaging some Pacific Rim partners. And then I also had a recent conversation last week about there's an increase in funding and support and activities related to civil rights. So there's some interest in perhaps engaging additional HBCU and other minority serving institutions, particularly on that topic. And that could be a layer across multiple CESUs where those partner institutions are. And also some conversations about working with partners in other parts of the world. So from the UK or Australia and other places. So those are conversations, they're not necessarily new, but they've kind of come back to the top of the list, which I think is interesting. So I can certainly talk about that with folks if they're interested and keep you informed as things develop. I also want to share just a snapshot of the current complement of partners that we have. And I'll mention a few things. We've been working on a 20-year program evaluation project that in part is related to this. This is kind of a running tally that I keep anyway, but we're including some other kind of deeper dives into some of that information for the program evaluation. But the bars that you see in this figure represent the 5-year multi-partner agreements that each CESU has. So the acronyms across the bottom are the 4-letter acronyms for each of the CESUs. Again, North Atlantic Coast is highlighted in red. But you can see as you've gone through your 5-year multi-partner agreements, you've started with a small complement of partners, then added more the next 5 years, then the next 5 years. And then in the most recent 5-year period, you added quite a few partners, and since then, even additional partners. So the orange bar is the one that's the current agreement to date. And we have a complement of 511 partners right now as of today. And that is distributed across a number of different organization types. So federal agencies, a few tribal nations, IHE is institutions of higher education. So about 2/3 of our non-federal partners are academic institutions, NGOs or nonprofit organizations, 26%, and then a few state and local government agencies as well. And that is one of the things we're looking at in the program evaluation is how has that distribution of organization types changed over the last 20+ years. I think by and large, in the beginning, it was primarily academic institutions. We had a few nonprofit organizations from the early days, but that number has grown over the last decade or so. And then the bottom bullet on the right is enrollments. And that number you might notice is higher than the unique partners. And that's because we have some partners that are in more than one CESU. They're enrolled in, for some of the federal agencies, all 17. For some of the non-federal partners, they're enrolled in 2 or 3 or 4, or even more than that. So that enrollment number goes higher. It's the kind of like the seats at the table in each of the 17 units across the group of partners. Just a quick slide of our current CSU council agencies. There are 17. These are the council representatives from each of those agencies. We've just had some recent changes to a couple of them. the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the Bureau of Reclamation. But I just list this as just a point of reference, but also to mention that we have one new agency that's just been approved to join the council, and that is the Department of the Interior Office of Native Hawaiian Relations. And then I had a call yesterday with the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, which is the sister agency to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And they'll be, my understanding is, hasn't come my way yet, but they're going to be submitting an application to become, they would be the 19th agency as well. And in fact, have some interest in doing work in the North Atlantic coast. So I'll keep you informed as that develops. There have also been conversations ongoing or off and on. And I know Brian has just emailed me recently about some conversations with the Environmental Protection Agency. They were an early agency in the program. They withdrew from the program in 2005. Only participated in one CESU, that was the Pacific Northwest CESU. But there have been a number of conversations over many years about EPA coming back into the program, and more frequent conversations in the last 6 months or so. So it's possible that they would come back in, and I'm not sure exactly which CESUs they would participate in. It's likely it would be in the regions where they also have regional science centers. So again, keep you informed on that as well. Brian and Judith were interested in having an update on our national program evaluation project that's actually being run through University of Rhode Island. It's been ongoing for over a year now, and we're trying to wrap that up this month. In fact, this is kind of an overview slide that identifies the approach that we're using, which is called appreciative inquiry. It looks at the things that are working well, and the idea is to do more of those things that are working well instead of focusing on things that might be not working well. We don't ignore those. We certainly address those as well, but oftentimes in an evaluation process, it's easy to focus on things that aren't working and miss the great things that are actually happening. So that's an approach that we've been using. We've done a number of different listening sessions and engagement activities, both with our federal partners and our non-federal partners, PIs, some students, long-time serving partners, new partners, to get different perspectives about the program. We've been looking at a number of different quantitative data, both projects and partners, and both at the national level and at the CESU level. We're looking at historic documents to look at the original framing of the program. Where are we now with respect to that sort of thing. So it's a kind of a multi-pronged approach at looking at the program over the last 20 plus years. In doing this, one of the things that we're building is a timeline of kind of notable events across the period that the program has been in existence. This is just a current snapshot of that, but looking at what were the early conversations even before the program was started that influenced the development of the program, so in the early to mid 90s, then the rounds of competition to bring on the different CSUs, changes in staffing at the national office, when we've had different types of activities instituted. For example, our funding of the regional CSUs changed in 2015. There's the 20-year marker that was in 2019. So those sorts of things, this will be contained in some different product outputs, that products and outputs that we'll have available once we wrap up the project. Here's another example. This is looking at our early funding model. This looks very busy because it is very busy, but each of the participating federal agencies provided funding to each of the host institutions at the time that they enrolled in their CESU. That approach went from 1999 to 2014. Since then, we've adopted a new funding model, but this is just an example of looking at the distribution of the funding across the agencies. Some of these agencies, for example, here's EPA, but they're no longer in the program, but this was just accounting for their participation when they were. Department of Energy as well left, but now we have a part of DOE back in the program in the Western states called the Western Area Power Administration. And there's some conversations there too about expanding that to all of DOE again. So anyway, it's just another example of some of the data that we're looking at across this program evaluation. Project types and distribution. So what different types of minority serving institutions participate in the CESU network? Just on the left, that's a simple bar graph, the total minority serving institutions, and then by different categories: historically Black colleges, universities, tribal colleges, universities, etc. On the right is just a snapshot of National Program Office funding over the last 20 years. We're looking at enrollments and when they occurred, by which type of organization. So you can see from 99 to current in the legend, federal agencies, institutions of higher education, NGOs is the catch-all for nonprofits, tribal, state, and local government, and then these with W's mark withdrawals from the program. And then another one that just shows general partners. This accounts for also withdrawals, but this is the current kind of program growth line in terms of numbers of unique partners and partner enrollments, similar to this data, summary data down here. We're looking at the distribution of types of partners across each of the units. So how many of which type of organization, what's the proportional component of each type of organization across each of the CESUs. You can see in some CESUs, they have a higher proportion, not necessarily number, but proportion of nonprofits than academic institutions. And in others, they're primarily academic institutions. Some have more federal agencies than others, et cetera. And then I included this, which is the partner enrollment numbers for the North Atlantic Coast. You can see in the first year you were, this was the original group that formed under the new North Atlantic Coast CSU in 1999. And then each year you've had, or almost each year, many of the years, you've had additional partners enroll across the last 20 plus years. And then this is just the screenshot of the current agreement that goes through 2024. Brian also mentioned that I should touch on the project database. There are a couple of different things. Project database is one of them, but this is our national project database called the CSU Project Tracker. It was originally supported by the USDA as a result of a number of five-year CESU renewals, where there were requests on a rotating basis for project data. And there was a discussion about how useful it would be to have a central database where people could look for those project data rather than individual emails going to multiple individuals across the years. And so that was the beginning of this. It's been in existence for a number of years. It is slowly getting populated. And there are some efforts, I know we're going to hear about some of this at your CSU right now today, but trying to get information put in here from all the partner organizations, all of the funding agencies from the beginning of the program, 1999 to current. And then it would serve as not necessarily a tracking database, but a catalog of projects that people could go in and query. So I just did a couple of screenshots. This is just like a blank screen of one of the tabs. You put in, project start date and end date, description, project number, the number of different fields across this. And I'm happy to answer any questions about this, but we'll be doing a webinar about this probably in late March that will enter some project data live so that people can see how it works. There are a number of different reports that you can pull down from the project tracker. Here's an example of a project, that's been populated about, this is about our National Minority Fellowship Program. So for example, if you have projects from your individual institutions that you'd like to enter into this system, then that would be great that other people could find them. And then just a few other recent initiatives and actions or things under development from the National Program Office. The National Council provides a modest amount of funding every year to help offset the costs of the host universities coordination administrative activities. And so this is just a kind of a summary of how well the agencies did towards reaching their minimum targets in 2021, 95%, 2022, 95%, with an asterisk, meaning that a couple of the interagency agreements didn't clear, but they're in the process of that right now. So we're still including them. We're going to be awarding those modifications in the near future. And then the FY23 was delayed by the continuing resolution, but we're getting funds coming in from the department, from DOD, NRCS, U.S. Army Corps, Farm Service Agency, and others. Currently, they're in review and in various stages of completion. But I'm optimistic that we'll reach that that minimum target that we've had on the books now for a number of years. And the way that works is each agency supports the CESUs where they participate at a modest level, a certain amount per CESU per year. I have in this line, I crossed out the includes the S because the DOI budget included a 5.5 million line item for the CESUs that did not materialize this year. That's the same, that happened in 2022 as well. So we hope for the best, and so far we haven't seen that materialize, but we remain optimistic that there are some other funding actions happening that will help support some CESU activities across the system. For one, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and two, the Inflation Reduction Act, both have funds that would be suitable for awarding through the CESUs for ecological restoration and resilience and other studies that support projects related to the bulk of that funding. And I noticed on the agenda that maybe there'll be some additional comments from some of the other federal partners about that, but leave it at that, that there is currently quite a bit of funding out there that we haven't seen in a while that we want to try to avail ourselves of if possible. I've mentioned grant solutions on here. This is the enterprise grant management program for the Department of the Interior. And it varies somewhat by bureau and region, even region within a bureau, in terms of how it's being implemented. And in, for example, the National Park Service, it may vary in terms of how one uploads documents for a given funded award, whether it's through grant solutions or it's distributed by email. And I think maybe that, I know, Brian, you probably have a better handle on that for your region. So if you're going to comment on that, great. I'll also mention that the National Park Service is developing a centralized framework for financial assistance and procurement, and that is still in the works. And so that may lead to some adjustments and different individuals that people will be working with when they're awarding officers and that sort of thing, as well, projects are awarded in the coming years. The CSU Council, I'm working with the council for a sustainable NPO as the National Program Office, and HUS is the Host University Support Funding, to try to increase those levels in the next go round. We're going to be submitting a proposal to the Department of the Interior as part of that, but we're trying to get the complement of agencies to support the National Program Office and Host University Support at a higher level. We're also working on a member withdrawal memo. So a formal process for keeping track of partners that may be inactive for a long period of time, and then giving them some assistance in terms of deciding if they'd like to stay in the program or withdraw from the program. Because we've heard over a number of years that this is a challenge when you have partners where the primary technical or administrative contact is no longer in that position or that role, and there has not been a new person designated, and that leads to dead end emails, et cetera, and non-response on different sort of administrative actions. So we're trying to make a process that can be implemented to solve that problem. Also in the works is we have a draft CESU benefits fact sheet. So that's going to be something that just more or less describes the CESU program and how different partners benefit from it, both tangible and intangible benefits, like, for example, students being able to work in the field with federal scientists and get gain a better understanding of what it might be like to be a public servant working for a federal agency, that sort of thing, as well as financial elements, but that's in the works. And then the CSU Network website, and Judith, you and I have talked about this a number of times. There is a beginning to be a draft website that will take the place of the current outdated CSU National website. So I'm trying to see if that can be accomplished this year with the modest funds that we have. I think we really need an update to a lot of our different pages. I did mention the 20-year program evaluation. We have 4 renewals happening this year. The North Atlantic Coast will be renewing next year, and that's I see is on the agenda. Last slide I have is a couple of additional things. I've covered some of these already. We have a diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility working group with representatives from a number of different CSUs across the system and agencies. We're working on a programmatic DEIA statement for the program. And then also we've been talking about the possibility of having DEIA fellows or liaisons to the CESUs if we can secure some funding. We had looked like we were going to get some funding last fall, and so it may be that we get it this year. If so, we might support some activities like that, a cohort of either grad students or early career professionals to serve that role across the CESUs. Mentioned the project tracker, project database. I know that you guys have just developed a new one there, and there's interest for this to be expanded across the entire network. Connecting with other networks. I participated in the long-term ecological research all scientists meeting last fall, and we have an activity happening in April that will be a CSU LTER network career panel. The idea is for students to be able to hear from CSU partner institution representatives about particular opportunities or a day in the life of kind of information related to activities for different CSU partners in different agencies. So I have this draft date, but I'm sure we're going to be circulating this around in the next week or so that it gets on people's calendars. Rapid response framework. Judith and I have talked about this and the possibility and interest in other regions for doing pilot efforts related to that. The Belmont Forum is an international funding opportunity with an RFP coming out later this month with a long application period. The Department of the Interior is a cooperator in that large international effort, and the CSU system is named in there. So that if there are funding actions related to the intersection of climate, environment, and health that are run through the Belmont Forum, it might be possible for our partner institutions to participate in those activities. There's not a lot more detail right now. There's not like an active block of funds available for this, but it is an activity that is connected to the CSU network at large. So if that can develop over the next 9 months or so, there'll be more information to share about that. And then the last thing is the national meeting that's planned for July in 2023 at the National Conservation Training Center in West Virginia. That'll be the first time we've met in person since 2018. So a lot of us are looking forward to having that opportunity again. We're hoping to dedicate some blocks of time to work on kind of strategic actions for the program, both at the individual CSU level and at the national program level. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm also happy if you think of something later, you can get in touch with me via email. But thanks so much. And I can stop sharing. Okay.
Thanks, Tom. Do we have any questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Tom. I'm going to pick up and talk a little bit about the project tracker that we're working on as the North Atlantic Coast CSU. So we have our own project tracker. So for those of you who are familiar with CSU or maybe not, I am going to share my screen so I can show you what we currently have on the website. So right now we have been tracking on the website and we have basically all of our projects listed and you can search by projects, but we are looking to streamline the process for reporting. So Brian and Judith and our web consultant, Bruce Hook, have been working on creating a projects database that people can load their projects directly into the web. And that way we can, in future, we can basically pull that data directly from the web and then import it into the national database that Tom was just showing you. So I invited Bruce to come on and talk a little bit about the database and kind of structure and function and how things work. So Bruce, I am going to let you take it away and you can share your screen and talk a little bit about it.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. Let me share my screen here. So yeah, here we are on the website for the North Atlantic Coast CESU, and I've clicked on the login link down here on the bottom in the footer, and we're going to log in, and we are logging in as if we're an admin at one of the partner institutions in the CESU. Right now we have in here test data. Right after this meeting, I'm going to clear away the test data. Wanted to have something to be able to show you, but I'll clear out the test data so that we can then start accepting real data into this system. So I've logged in here. I'm not going to go over most of these things because we already went over those in a previous meeting, and we're also going to be sending out instructions soon, sending out instructions that will cover that, and then also include new instructions for the projects and products parts. So we will go straight into here. I'm not going to go through every detail, just try and hit some of the key things that it's important to be aware of about this system. So as you might imagine, projects is really the heart of this. So again, here is, again, we're as if we're an admin at a partner institution. And so we then see all the projects listed here that are associated with that partner institution, with the ability to go in and edit them and update them. If I'd logged in as a PI, and we'll get to that, how that's going to happen in a minute here, if logged in as a PI, I would just see the projects that I was the PI on. So go in here as if we're going to add a new project. And our expectation, particularly initially here, is that the initial setup here of the project is typically going to be done by somebody who's more administrative level. But then as we further down in this form are things that would typically come from the PI. But so the initial setup is all or nearly all the information needed should be in either the notice of award or task agreement. So just pulled from there and entered into here. And that agreement or award is also uploaded as part of this. So we go through, and some fairly straightforward information here, just to keep track of this all. But we come down here and there's the amendments. And so this is a key point, sort of the reminder that this is not just sort of a one-time, okay, it's in the system, we're done. This is a living document. So if there's amendments to the project, those will need to be entered. And some of the information further down on here is only going to be available at the end of the project. So this is sort of an ongoing thing. Principal investigator is another key piece. Once we start using this system, we'll get the PIs into here. We just come down, select in the drop down, and hopefully the PI is there and we're all set. But otherwise we select other and then enter the information for the principal investigator. And important to get that email address right, because once we enter this information here and save this form, two important things will happen. One is that PI will be added to this dropdown. So next time you can just select them. Second is that an ID, a login ID for the system will be created for the PI and emailed to them with some information telling them that this project has been set up for them and that they now need to go in and add any additional information that's needed. So that is an important part of this, is to loop the PIs in basically relatively automatically. Now, if we were just doing initial setup, this is where we'd get down to and say, okay, this is as much information as we need to get the project into the system. And at this point, we can scroll down and hit save. And an important piece to realize, as soon as we hit save, this information is then also copied over to that front side view. Not everything, obviously, not all of the personal contact information, but the essential information of the project is copied over to that public side. So when you're filling this out, this is information that's going to be public immediately. So just sort of to be aware of that, that this is a public record, and to think of it in that way. Obviously, if you know some of this information, you could go ahead and check it off, but typically then just scroll down at this point and save it. Now, this is the other piece I want to touch on here, is that if we're starting the project, it's still open, click save. As long as we filled in the required fields up at the top, we're all set. We want to close the project. At this point, there's basically almost all the fields now need to be filled out to close the project. So if I tried to hit save now, there'd be all sorts of messages because I haven't filled in anything, but in particular, there'd be messages about you need to fill in a bunch of these ones that are not required just to open the project. Now, the expectation is that, particularly with things like the number of students involved, that the PI is going to need to provide that information at the end of the project. So, so that's this core project form. And then once saved, it would show up in this list here. Just quick summary list, and you can also filter the list to try and find, if you've got a lot of projects here, try and filter the list to find the one you're looking for. So that's the core. Then we'll take a quick look here at products. Again, we've got a list of all of the products associated with your partner institution, or if it was a PI login, they would just see their products. And the expectation is probably more often this part is going to be filled out by the PI. But we'll go in here now to add a new product. Each product can be associated with up to 3 projects. Usually, often it's just one project, but can be in some cases more than one. So we've got a lot of options for what kind of project it can be. And if it doesn't fit any of these, there's always the other option. So I won't go through all the details here. I think it's fairly straightforward. There is the citation piece and citation examples if anybody needs an example of what a citation should look like. Chance to upload the product if that's a possibility, or provide a link to it. The other key piece I want to touch on here is assigning this product. So if it's an admin person that's entering this, then they would typically want to select the PI from this list, the PI that is associated with the project that this product is connected to. What that does is then it allows the PI to also edit this listing. If they realize, oh, there's a mistake there, they can go in and correct it. The admin can still also edit it, but the PI also then has access to it. So that's an important piece there. Now, if I was a PI entering this, I wouldn't even see that because it's already assigned to me as the PI. So those are those 2 core pieces. Then we also have this piece for photographs, hoping to start to gather some photographs, because in this visual world, photographs are such a great communication tool. Again, expectation is probably more often come from the PI. Same system here, add photograph. The key point I want to highlight here is there is space to add 3 photographs per project. So not looking to get 300 photographs, every photograph from project, just 3 that really highlight what the project, sort of tell the story of the project. And Once this form has been filled out and the project's been selected here and it's saved, if you come back in again to a new copy of this form, you won't see the project there because it already has its 3 photographs. You could always come in here and edit and get rid of a photograph, replace it, or if you haven't submitted 3, you could add some, but trying to just get a few photographs here to start to gather that side of things. So again, we have this assign this entry to, so can also give the PI ability to work in this. Again, the PI would not see this if it was a PI login. And then consent for use, obviously there's not really much. The whole point of these is to be able to have photographs that we can then use to talk about what the CESU is doing. So those are the 3 elements of our system. And as noted, also part of this is that the core pieces of this, particularly the projects and products, will then on an occasional basis be uploaded to the federal system. So this has been carefully designed so that crosswalk should be fairly straightforward, so we can do regular updates to get this information to the federal system. And meanwhile, it will be immediately available here on the projects and products part of the CESU website. So that's an overview of that piece, and I will stop sharing at this point. And unless there are questions, I will hand it back off to Jackie.
That's really great. So just to reiterate a couple of things that Bruce said. So we are working on instructions on how to access the website and how to access this database. So Bruce has been kind enough to start to develop those for us. So we'll be reviewing those and we will send them out in the next couple of weeks. So you certainly didn't have to memorize everything Bruce went through today. We'll be able to provide that to you. Yeah, I think that's it. So if there are any questions for Bruce, we can probably take a minute or 2. Oh, Brian's got his hand raised.
See if I can lower it now. Hi. I just wanted to, not really a question, but just to emphasize, I know it looks like there's a substantial amount of work involved in getting projects in and keeping them updated. I did, try some test entry, and once you get used to it, it really only takes a couple of minutes to get a project in. But I also wanted to emphasize kind of why it's important and why it's worth putting that effort in. The biggest is that this is a fantastic way to promote your work. So you've gone through a lot of effort to get a project started and done a great job with it. By entering your project information and supplying your products and a few photos, it makes your project much easier for federal agencies to locate. So like the first thing I do when someone in the Park Service asks me for help finding a cooperator is I look through the projects database and I look to see if there's someone who's done similar work, and I share that information with the person who's looking for help. So this is just a really great way to start making some connections to get similar work and make yourself more visible to agencies. Also, just wanted to second the comment about photos. We use photos all the time when we have them for all sorts of outreach efforts, including illustrating our annual renewal report. So having a few photos from some of your projects is a good way to get that project in front of a lot of people. When I do outreach, I go and I look for photos for any projects I can find.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. That looks great. I had a question related to the experts database. Will this connect to the experts database? So if someone's in the experts database and then they're also PI in a project, the projects database, is there a connection in there? So if you look up someone on the experts database, there'll be a list of projects that they could explore, or are they separate systems?
There'll be separate systems. I won't go into
Okay.
the stuff about why, but yeah, they're separate.
Yeah,
systems.
just curious. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
And just an anecdote, once when we were talking about developing the project database and an experts database, and I think the fellow was from NC State, and he said, well, if you have all those projects and all those project PIs, you already have an experts database. Because he said, these are people that have done funded projects through the CESU. If we could just harvest all those names, then now, of course, not all of them would be current anymore, but it was a a good thought, I thought, at the
Mhm.
time.
I view them as complementary because where the experts database is great is for getting maybe new people who have come on board and have expertise, or finding somebody who's outside of the people who we've already worked with, if you want to sort of broaden the group of people. So I kind of look at it hand in hand, that the experts database is a great way if you have not yet, especially if you have not yet gotten a lot of agreements with federal agencies to do work, then you can get your expertise in front of those agencies and they'll start considering you for projects. It gets people out of that catch-22 of having to having already had to have work in order to get new projects started.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Mm. Mhm.
You want and talk about updates?
Sure, I guess I'll do that. Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can share my screen and get things organized here. Can folks see my screen? Or at least can folks see, is that showing the whole screen or just the slide? Oh, it's not sharing yet. Let's try this.
Yep.
Okay, just the slide. Great. Fantastic. So yeah, thanks for the time in the meeting today. Today I'm going to try and briefly cover sort of what my role is in the CESU and the National Park Service, as well as give an overview of current initiatives that could lead to some CSU partner project funding, as well as provide some tips on how to find opportunities and be a little bit more visible to federal agencies. You've already seen this figure once before, but my role is tied closely to the objectives of the CESU network as a whole, and you can kind of summarize that as ensuring that resource managers have access to timely and high quality research, technical assistance, and education. Also creating and maintaining effective partnerships among agencies and universities, as well as encouraging professional development of federal scientists and helping to efficiently manage federal science resources. So I help staff in my agency with access to research, technical assistance, and education that they need in order to manage parks. I help to connect partners with agency staff in order to build relationships and resolve different resource management issues. In a little more depth, my role includes project support, which means helping partners and Park Service staff to develop projects and process agreements. This includes master cooperative agreements that the National Park Service requires before specific projects can be awarded. I do a lot of collaboration, and that includes working closely with the CESU staff at the University of Rhode Island to help manage the North Atlantic Coast CESU. The collaboration work includes helping match agency needs to different CESU partners. Some current examples of collaborative work that I'm doing is helping with the project database that was just demonstrated, and work on the experts database that we've already sort of touched on, that will allow people to create profiles that identify their fields of expertise. I'll have a little bit more on the experts database in a few minutes. My role also includes promoting the CESU network in a number of ways. So this can be annual outreach to Park Service staff in the Northeast. I have a series of meetings coming up in March that I'm working on. And also expanding outreach to areas that have had less engagement with the CSU. So I recently talked to the regional planning team to give them an introduction of what the CSU can do. As part of the Park Service agreement with the University of Rhode Island, I'm also an adjunct faculty member, and I'll be contributing to the educational mission of the university. And then I'm also a senior science advisor to my my region's regional office. So that role includes managing proposal review panels, evaluating scientific research, making management recommendations based on the best available science, managing peer review of different reports, as well as supporting agency science and management priorities. So speaking of agency priorities, I think it's worth highlighting the current administration's priorities because there is a direct relationship between those priorities, agency priorities, and then agency funding opportunities. The Biden administration put forward 7 priorities Two of them have potential funding implications for cooperative ecosystem studies unit agencies, and then their non-federal partners. So climate change is perhaps the most important of the two. Agencies are directed to tackle the climate crisis by reducing pollution and increasing climate resiliency. Racial equity is also a government-wide effort, and this priority includes a focus on racial justice, respect for tribal sovereignty as well. In my agency, there's interest in promoting civil rights education, as well as increasing engagement with tribal nations and incorporating traditional ecological knowledge into decision-making. So some of the Biden administration priorities can be seen in the bipartisan infrastructure law. I know Tom mentioned this earlier, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on how this might be relevant to CSU non-federal partners. This law was passed in November 2021. It includes $550 billion in funding that's available through 2026. Most of that money, the lion's share really, is going to large infrastructure projects, things like roads, bridges, and trains. But there are funds to support climate and equity priorities, including orphaned wells, wildland fire, and ecosystem restoration. So the ecosystem restoration funds are the most likely to have opportunities for CSU partners through two opportunities. One's the America the Beautiful Challenge grants, and then there are agency managed projects. So the America the Beautiful Challenge is being managed by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and it includes $400 million in total funding. Last year, the foundation awarded about $91 million across 55 projects. The program is encouraging partnerships to conserve and restore ecosystems at fairly large scales. They want to improve landscape connectivity. They want to improve resilience to climate change. So there's the administration priority again. They want to expand outdoor access and engage tribes and local communities, another administration priority. The focus is really on large scale and collaborative efforts. So last year, there were 4 categories of grants. Proposals for the first 2 categories needed to be led by states, territories, or tribes, but nonprofit and educational institutions were allowed to be subrecipients. Nonprofit and educational institutions were allowed to lead proposals for the 3rd and 4th categories that are listed on this slide. Interestingly, state universities may or may not be eligible to apply to all categories. It really depends on whether or not the state university is officially a part of the state government. So some may and some may not. In 2022, the program was announced in May with proposals due in July. I would expect that there will be a similar timeline this year and probably very similar categories, although, until this is announced, we don't know. But bottom line is, this is, especially if you're working with a number of partners and willing to engage on some large scale conservation, this is a funding opportunity that CSU partners should be fairly well placed to compete in. So the bipartisan infrastructure law also has about $900 million allocated to agency projects that fall within 10 different activities that are defined in the law. The activities that are relevant to the National Park Service are listed to the left on the graphic on this slide. But it's been interesting to see the transition. In order to focus the impact of the funding, the Department of the Interior has actually moved towards a portfolio approach, which means they've asked the Park Service and other agencies to define some broad themes, and the Park Service themes are identified at the top of this graphic. Within each portfolio, about 80% of the funds are going to be targeted to specific keystone initiatives that are listed near the bottom of the graphic. And this means that funds specifically targeted to the Northeast are fairly limited. You may think that the island and coastal portfolio, that's one furthest to the left, could be applicable to the Northeast, but really they're focusing on Pacific and territories for that one. And most of the other portfolios are similarly focused on other regions. The exception for the Northeast is the Appalachia portfolio, the 4th one, and that is targeting improving human and environmental health in Appalachia. So within my agency, we're working to allocate the remaining $59 million in ecosystem restoration funding. by this time next year. And
I think we lost Brian. So we'll wait just a second to see if he comes back on. If not, we can move to the next agenda item. Elin, do you want to talk about communication while we wait for Brian to come back on?
Yeah,
Sorry about
definitely. I can do that. And then when Brian comes back, he can, I think he popped out. So I'll get started with that. We wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we communicate sort of within the CESU. So as you probably already are familiar with, you do get occasional emails from me and Jackie and sometimes Brian. So whenever there is a funding request that comes to Brian from within the National Park Service, or if there is any other federal agency that is interested in working with us, our CESU specifically, and if they send it to him or to us, then I will send it out to you immediately. So as soon as we get them, we try to get them out to you on the very same day. Unfortunately, many of them have very short fuses. Like I sent you one yesterday that was due on February 24th. And I understand, especially when you have to work through offices of sponsored projects that need like a week lead time and so forth, it's hard to respond. But what we request from you, from the technical representatives, is that when you receive such emails, that you distribute them as widely as you can within your organization, so that the people who may be interested in applying have a chance to get them. So from me, you'll get those direct NOFOs and RFPs. And I've also taken it upon myself to sort of scan grants.gov and other resources on a weekly basis. So if I find stuff that I think looks interesting, I will pass it along to you too. And then there'll be some other communications, like about this meeting that we're having today and about our self-assessment that's coming up and so forth. But that's basically the information that comes from me. So, and I see you guys here as really my technical hubs within your organization. So as I said before, I'm hoping that you then can sort of get the information to the right people within your organizations. So I see, Brian, you're back online. We just skipped ahead and talked a little bit about communication. So I'll hand it back to you again to finish your presentation.
Yeah, great timing for an internet outage. I'm actually on a phone hotspot now, so we'll see how this goes. Let me see if I can share my screen again. Okay, can folks see that?
Yeah.
Great. There's some windows here. This was the slide I was on when you lost me, right? Okay. All right. I saw it blink out, and hopefully it was. Hopefully I wasn't talking for too long into the void. I think I was saying that there was an extremely short turnaround with the Park Service with the first phase of funding, with literally 6 days, including a weekend, to get projects submitted. Hopefully we'll get better lead time on future projects. There are going to be 2 more phases of funding for ecosystem restoration projects within the Park Service. But it also appears that the guidance that they sent is, of course, crystal clear. It looks like all the proposals may be due sometime in April, even though they're not planning on awarding some of the money until next year. So who knows? System is evolving, but they're just letting you know that there is funding for ecosystem restoration projects. There have been CSU partners that have been involved in getting some of this ecosystem restoration funding already, and it's likely that more will be involved as we move forward. If you have any ideas for projects, this is a great time to connect with agency contacts as soon as possible, because these will move pretty quickly once they start going. I do not know exactly what the deadlines are going to be in other agencies. I know there's some attempt to coordinate portfolios between Department of Interior agencies. So hopefully other agencies like BLM and Fish and Wildlife Service and USGS have similar portfolios to the Park Service, or at least something compatible, because I know that they're trying to focus impact on these portfolios across agencies. And that's going to be some of the work I think that's going into the next couple of phases of this process. Also wanted to talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act. This is the other major funding initiative right now. It was signed into law in August of 2022. This one provides $370 billion in funding through 2031, and it does include a few initiatives at North Atlantic Coast CSU partner agencies that should be open to non-federal partners. So Bureau of Land Management and National Park Service are sharing about $500 million that is intended to support climate change resilience and ecosystem restoration. So Park Service has not yet issued any guidance regarding these funds, but I have seen some initial information that indicates that Park Service has about 190 million across those two areas. So 95 million in climate change funds, and the Park Service is looking at a pretty large ecosystem resilience fund, as well as additional funding for protecting cultural resources, as well as conducting climate change vulnerability assessments. The 95 million that is assigned to ecosystem restoration is likely to involve funding for decision support, restoration of priority imperiled systems, as well as management of priority invasive species. Within NOAA, there's substantial funding that is actually $2.6 billion for climate resilience, as well as funds for weather and climate research and forecasting. I am not sure what the process is going to be at NOAA or at BLM, but I suspect that we'll start seeing more information about opportunities related to the Inflation Reduction Act in the coming months. Beyond bill and IRA, there will be a continued base level of funding from the federal agencies. So using Park Service funding as an example, the total spending on CSU projects actually exceeded 50 million nationally for the first time last year. This was probably due to initial funding from bipartisan infrastructure law ecosystem restoration projects. The funds and number of projects that are going to the North Atlantic Coast CSU partners has declined over the last couple of years. That may reflect some impacts from my position being in transition and less outreach to Park Service to make new people aware of the program. Over the years, Park Service funding going to the North Atlantic Coast CSU partners has typically been between about 1 and 1.5 million, and usually about 23 or so projects a year. There was an exception in 2013 and 14. That's when the bulk of Superstorm Sandy related projects were started. Other CSU networks show some different funding patterns. The Desert Southwest has been fairly flat, for example. You can see some storm-related fluctuations in the South Florida and Caribbean network funding. And then there's also some pretty, some actual fairly large increases in funding going to the Chesapeake Watershed CESU. That CSU has about double the number of non-federal partners that we have, and it appears that last year they may have had about 20% of Park Service funding going through their partners. There's definitely a couple of big ticket projects that were funded by the central office in Washington from the Park Service that contributed to a bit of this. But you know, I also know that the Chesapeake Watershed CSU has done a really solid job in doing outreach within the agency and to CSU partners, and that they also have a database of experts that's made it a lot easier for agency staff to find potential partners for projects. So I'm certainly hoping to replicate some of the Chesapeake Watershed success in our CSU I'm definitely going to be doing what I can to increase outreach, and I'm also working with Bruce and Elin and Jackie and Amber on our own experts database. This database is going to allow people at our CSU partners to post a profile that has their contact information, their areas of expertise, a website link, a CV, and a short bio. It's all going to be searchable. The collected profiles become a resource that agencies can use when they're trying to identify people with skills that they need. So, and I can't emphasize how useful this is. This is, the Chesapeake Watershed database is my other go-to when someone in my region asks me for help with a project. I know that I can find lots of people with different skills on that database, and having the same for our CSU would be a huge benefit. So we began work on this database recently. We're using funding that was provided by the National Park Service. We're hoping to make a couple of changes from the Chesapeake Watershed version. We're looking to make ours more automated and easier to maintain than the Chesapeake Watershed version, and hoping that will encourage other CSUs to get involved with this database and provide their own set of experts as well to make it even more visible. The other major difference from the Chesapeake Watershed CSU's database is the addition of a component to support environmental emergency response. I know Tom briefly touched on this during his talk. The idea is that participants will optionally be able to identify skills and interests relevant to supporting emergency teams. This is going to make it a lot easier for agencies and potentially state and local governments to get assistance after the next hurricane or oil spill occurs. And it's just another way that our CSU partners can get some benefits from being a member of the CSU. I did want to I've just got a couple more slides. I wanted to finish with some information about how to locate different agency funding opportunities, and also just give you a short overview of the Park Service funding process, since Park Service unfortunately has to be different. For the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the best way to locate opportunities is to search on grants.gov. And I've been using a CESU search term when I look for opportunities. And this identifies any opportunities that mention the CESU in the announcement somewhere. For BLM and Fish and Wildlife Service, they don't seem to be specifically targeting the CESU, but they do note in the details of their announcement that CSU partners have a 17.5% overhead rate, and that they can use the difference in overhead from their normal overhead as match. So this definitely helps make CSU partners a little bit more competitive for these different opportunities, and hopefully folks will keep an eye on what's available on grants.gov through these agencies. The USGS also does not distribute announcements, but they do clearly label their CSU announcements when they post them on grants.gov, and they generally do target a single CSU network for their announcements. Some of you may have seen an announcement that went out, I think, a few days ago from USGS, maybe it was last week. And I believe that we're planning on continuing to do that. I think the URI team is going to be doing a weekly check for new announcements from USGS and distribute any that target our CSU. And then finally, I wanted to mention Park Service's approach. We will often use requests for letters of interest, or we'll do a request for proposals to identify partners for projects. When I work with people on requests, I do try to encourage them to give at least 4 weeks for responses, and preferably more. But I know that in many cases, the turnarounds are usually less than that. And I know that makes it really difficult to respond in a timely manner. But a lot of times with the Park Service, there is just a really short window between when people receive funds and when they actually have to award their cooperative agreement. And unfortunately, the response period gets shortened because of that. So just a little bit on how. So just a bit on an overview of the process that we use in the Park Service for funding CSU agreements, and since this process can be confusing. Also, unfortunately, and this also, I think Tom touched on this as well, this process is also subject to change. Park Service is centralizing the financial assistance operations at the national level beginning later this year. So I don't know if there's going to be changes coming in how cooperative agreements are handled, but and we'll just kind of have to wait and see, and I'll try and send out an update if I get one. But the current process is that before any specific projects can be funded, most of the regions, I think 5 out of 7 now of the Park Service, require that a master cooperative agreement be in place between the agency and the non-federal partner. The way we get those master agreements established is the non-federal partner has to start by responding to a notice of funding opportunity for the CESU system. In this case, the application that can be used in the response can be your membership application for joining the CESU. After the Park Service does a merit review of that application, we can establish a master cooperative agreement, and that agreement will outline almost all of the general provisions that govern the relationship between the agency and the partner, but it doesn't transfer any actual funding. That agreement lasts for 5 years, and it can be renewed. But without a master cooperative in place, it's not going to be possible to award a task agreement. The task agreements end up being a lot shorter. Those end up just having essentially information that's directly relevant to the project, since all the other terms were agreed to in the master agreement. So then, basically when a project need arises, Park Service staff can do one of two things. They may contact a PI directly if they're aware of someone, or if they found someone through the projects or the experts databases. If they do want competition, or if they're not aware of someone with the right skills, the Park Service will often do this request for letters of interest, and will then select a PI based on the responses. The main role for the partner then ends up being developing a full proposal, and then making sure that their organization submits the right forms, the SF 424 set of forms through Grant Solutions. And then once that's done, the Park Service contact can create a task agreement, share it with the project PI, and once everyone agrees on that, then it goes to the financial assistance team for approval. So it's a lengthy process, and I am working on a text version description of this that we'll post to the CESU website to help folks navigate this process. And I think that just gets me to questions if there are any. And again, sorry for the internet outage earlier.
No worries. Thank you so much, Brian. This was very helpful, I think. And it's exciting to see that there are so many possible opportunities, that it seems like we might be busy this year getting a lot of different requests for proposals. But yeah, I wonder if anybody has questions.
Hi, I have a question. I'm Tiffany Fleming from ESF, and I'm wondering about the purpose of setting up the agreement. Does that allow the HEIs to apply for funding that we otherwise would not be able to?
Sorry, which agreement? The master agreement?
The master cooperative agreement.
And you said, I wasn't sure what acronym, use an acronym, HEI.
Oh, for higher ed institution.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've gotten a lot of questions about master cooperative agreements since I'm working on 11 renewals right now. And, and it is odd because the cooperative and joint venture agreement really has a lot of the same terms. And it's essentially set up so that you should be able to issue tasks directly under it. But I think it comes down to just the systems we're working with. That cooperative and joint venture agreement is not in Grant Solutions. It's multi-agency and multi-partner. And Park Service needs to have a one-to-one arrangement with our cooperators in order to issue the financial assistance. So the master agreement does set up that arrangement, and then we can quickly issue tasks under it. One of the things that we've been trying to encourage the financial assistance program to go towards is to allow just standalone cooperative agreements, they're called. So they would have, basically they'd have the information's in the master agreement plus the information in a task agreement all in one document. And, especially if you're a non-federal partner that just has 1 or 2 agreements a year, that approach is probably easier. Where the master task approach is easier is when there's just lots of actions. if there's a number of opportunities that a partner is going to be getting. So we're hoping for some flexibility, but for now, we don't have any, unfortunately, and we just have to go through this step-by-step process. Tom, did you actually have a question? It looks like your hand's up.
Yeah, well, no, I was just going to comment. While you were talking and you mentioned grants.gov, I just went in there and popped CESU in there, and there are 89 opportunities listed today. So that's from a number of different agencies, NOAA, BLM, USGS, Fish and Wildlife. And then, as Brian said, you may have to dig a little bit deeper into their documents to find the actual CSU specific language, because some of their, like, for example, Fish and Wildlife Service, they'll put out an RFP that is open beyond just the CSUs, but has specific language in there about the CSUs.
Right.
Also, just about the master and task and cooperative agreements, it's not entirely clear even for the National Park Service staff. So I issued for the Host University Support Awards year before last, 5 of them were standalone cooperative agreements because they were in regions where there were not master cooperative agreements. But since then, I think 2 of those regions have changed to using master cooperative agreements. So it's a bit of a moving target at times anyway.
And I actually was able to convince my region to go with a standalone cooperative agreement for a new CSU cooperator last year. Although I think in the end, it did not go through as a CSU agreement. So we'll see. It looks like David, you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks for all this interesting information. I had a couple of questions about now that we're talking, you talk some about like where to look for funding opportunities and how that works. So, the regional framework, the projects that come through, are they usually just targeted for partners in a particular region? Or are a lot of these actually projects where being a partner in a particular region gives you access to projects in all these other regions?
That's a great question, and the answer is it varies. Sometimes at least within Park Service, sometimes the Park Service contact will really want to get someone local to their park, and they will target towards one CSU. Sometimes they'll target towards 2 or 3 that are in an area, and then other times they will send it out to the entire CSU network. So it really does depend on the project, but almost every CSU will have certain projects that are only targeted at that CSU, and USGS in particular seems to really just identify one CSU and send a announcement out for that CSU. I suspect that in that case, they often have a partner in mind, but they're at least opening it up a little broader for competition.
Great. And one other related question, I guess. It seems like a lot of times in my experience looking at some of the like Park Service requests for letters of interest, it seems like these are really kind of originating with the sponsoring agency. And I was wondering if you have much suggestion, if we got to the point where, as one of the partners, we really kind of had suggestions for projects we want to do. So it sounds like from what you were saying that one of the ways that we would try and kind of approach that is help you building out an expert database that kind of specifies the types of projects we could do or the support we could provide. And also, I guess talk to you about like the kinds of things that might be of interest. You do actual outreach though, where you're essentially kind of, it sounds like kind of pitching our expertise to, property managers in the region.
Right.
Am I understand? I'm not sure where my question is exactly there, but am I understanding this kind of? So do I have the opportunity to kind of like bubble up ideas about what we should do?
And I wanted to really touch on that because, the CSU is intended to be 2 ways, and it's supposed to be bidirectional communication. And A lot of times it really has leaned much more heavily towards agency decides what they want and sends out an announcement. But I do really want to support folks to, if you have ideas on projects that you think would be of benefit to the Park Service or other agencies, send them up. And you can, especially for Park Service, you can reach out to me, and I will try to connect you with the right people to talk to in parks. USGS has an active research coordinator right now too, who would be really willing to match you up with somebody. And I can also, I actually know the Fish and Wildlife Service person as well, and can at least link you in and start a conversation. And I think that there are, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I was working with a team who had a research idea for Northern Maine, and we were discussing that project with the park. So there's definitely opportunities for getting ideas coming up from researchers.
Great. Thank you. That's very helpful.
It looks like Elizabeth.
Yeah, I typically, for my sector, I'm looking for the ethnography, cultural landscape, heritage, those particular areas, and particularly in climate change work these days. And those happen to be mostly the Park Service. And so we're constantly running into that wall of there's not enough time because the university requires so much lead time. So if we want any help at the university in getting a proposal in, it needs to be flagged a month and a half before it's due. And there's almost never a month and a half for these. And so I'm constantly requesting, can we please just put this through faster? And that causes a real problem for us. I'm wondering if there's any way that we can get people to send those out earlier, or, put them on a board where we can go check weekly, something that is just going to give us a little bit more time.
Yeah, so the turnaround is really short from when I get something to when it's sent out to you. And this is something I'm going to be emphasizing in my outreach this year, that, I hear loud and clear that folks need more time. And I do want to mention, though, that a lot of the requests for interest, that's an initial letter. The university shouldn't need, you normally don't even need to have a budget in those. Maybe, I guess it depends. Sometimes for the cultural projects, they do actually want a lot of detail. So I do hear on that, and I will be talking to folks this year about trying to allow for, that 6 week rather than the 2 weeks that we saw. It's really, I really hate to see those short turnaround things come out, and I see them all the time. But I try and at least get them to you, via Elin and Jackie as fast as we can, just in case there is a chance that you can meet the timeline. And it's going to be a battle, and we're constantly fighting. We still don't have budget numbers for the Park Service, really, not at the local level. So it's and our deadlines are coming up in a few months for actually having the agreements in. So we're just caught between this sort of vice.
Totally understood. Just trying to find ways of making this easier. And also with our administration, with our research administration, because they're always adamant, you have to have a budget. I don't care if they're only asking for qualifications, you've got to have a budget. And so I'm constantly fighting that battle with them. So
okay. I'll emphasize 6 weeks would be really
yeah, it would be wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tom?
Well, just so this example from Elizabeth and also from David, as we have this national meeting coming up this summer, seems like these might be good elements to include if we're going to develop any kind of guidance documents for our regional federal partners. And Brian, I shared with you a regional memo from the Pacific Northwest. That's National Park Service, but it's from the regional director out to all of their parks and programs in the region, encouraging them to engage with their CESU partners I think a document like that would be a perfect place for there to be some language in there about, keep in mind our non-federal partners need a minimum amount of time to prepare a response to requests for statements of interest, for example. And then on this bidirectional communications piece, and we've talked about this, and I've talked about this with Judith, it's come up a number of different times, but this, at least for the Department of the Interior agencies, they have a particular allowance that allows for an unsolicited proposal to be considered, but there may be benefit to having broader conversations kind of strategically on a regional basis about particular things that you see, whether natural resource, cultural resource, landscape scale, socioeconomic, whatever it might be, to have amongst the group, but also engage with the potential sponsoring agency, regional management unit individuals where possible, to get that on the radar. I know I had a letter from a partner at the University of Pennsylvania who does historic preservation, and his comment was, we're so often being forced to be reactionary when there's a problem, and we then go out and deal with it. But we as experts in the field know already what the problems are, and if we could be proactive, we could avoid having to react in places where it's a dire circumstance, and we could be more proactive in preventing some impact, especially for climate change and built environment, things like that. Anyway, not to go too far down that path, but it seems like some of these things, we should at least make a mental note about these to include in a conversation this summer.
And, you know, I just want to emphasize that the parks really do want to be laboratories for research. So if you have research ideas, a lot of times the parks will be willing to listen, and will even work on trying to request internal funding through our, it's called our service-wide combined call, for different projects that, you know, they may not have even known about already, and they just may need someone to really conceive it and write a short, you know, pre-proposal for it in order to start getting some funding. I think we're getting tight on time, so I should pass this on to Elin.
I just wanted to ask one question to follow up on that. So I know on our website there are, we do list who the agency contacts are for the federal agencies for us, for the NAC CESU. But say if somebody within our network was interested to reaching out to somebody at NOAA, for example, if they had an idea and they thought it would fit, like, is there do we have some sort of, I don't know if instructions is the right word, but like, how would you go about, like, could Elizabeth reach out directly to a program officer, or does she have to go through me or go through you, Brian? Like, how does it normally work?
If you know, a lot of times making the connection at the lowest level possible seems to work really well. If you can identify who the person is at the, like, you know, facility you want to work with, the direct contact is great. If you need help though, you know, that's where I can step in, especially with Park Service. I can definitely help you find the right person. You know, like some of our, unfortunately, some of the federal contacts are not so responsive on email. So, you know, but again, you know, I'm kind of here to kind of help coordinate the federal agencies. So if you have trouble, if anyone has trouble getting a hold of someone at a federal agency, let me know and I will see what I can do. I can't guarantee, like, you know, I'm still trying to make connections with some of our partner agencies. Hopefully the renewal process will bring those people to the table, and I'll be able to, you know, gauge how exactly I can help with these sorts of things. But I'm definitely willing to help coordinate.
Thanks, Brian. So in the next piece, well, we're starting to wrap up, but you know, myself and Brian and even Jackie are all pretty new to the CESU. So in preparing for this meeting, we sent out a little survey with 3 questions that we thought we could talk about as a group. We thought about breaking out into smaller groups, but I think we'll just talk as a big group here. So the first question we asked was how you've engaged with the CESU over the last year. And I think that the answers that we got from the group was that we've, you know, they've seen the information that we've shared by email. seeing opportunity postings and so forth. They have people in your groups, you have CESU projects, so you work on those projects and bill for them. You worked on your multi-year CSU agreements, the task agreements, submitting proposals. So those are, not surprisingly, the types of things you've done over the last year. And thinking about next year or looking forward, it seems it's pretty much more of the same, looking for opportunities, wrapping up projects, doing these task agreements and so forth. And the last question we asked was, in what ways do you need support from the host institution and from Brian as the research coordinator? And so I think it seems like people appreciate getting the notification of project opportunities, and then, as we've discussed here, if they could get the calls for funding opportunities as soon as possible. And we definitely hear that. And I think, Brian is great. He will send me and Jackie stuff, within minutes or hours at most after he receives them. And then we've taken it upon ourselves to get anything out on the same day that we get it from Brian. So you should be getting anything that comes into our inboxes should be with you within 24 hours or so. So that's a promise that we're going to try to keep. And then I guess we're always here if anybody has a question, and if I don't have the answer to the question, I'll kick it over to Brian, or we might kick it down to Tom if it's a question that none of us know how to or Judith, who probably knows. But I do see that there may be at least one person, said something about maybe getting some help in making the contacts with other parks or with contacts within federal agencies. So that is an interesting comment that I think that's totally valid, and would love to help if we can. So those were the sort of the responses that we got. So just wanted to open up to the group here and see if you have anything else to add, especially on the question about what help we can provide to you over this coming year.
Looks like David's got his hand up.
I'll throw out one other comment about the timing, all of this, to kind of follow up on Elizabeth. So there's oftentimes a short time from an RFP to a response, and then a lot of times also, as you mentioned, Brian, sometimes then from getting a project accepted to getting everything finalized really has kind of sometimes has a bit of an accordion life to it. And that also is sometimes really hard for university partners, especially if one of the projects that we've had with the Park Service is a research and training program where we have a bunch of graduate students that are working on it, and so our ability to kind of understand when that funding is going to be available vis-a-vis students that we're trying to actually kind of track through programs sometimes really becomes an exercise in hair pulling. So I know that's a complicated part of this, and not something that you can necessarily solve, but it's another aspect of the timing and the cycling of all of this that sometimes is really hard in the university context.
Yeah, I will say that at least probably the only good thing about the task agreement, master agreement process is that the task agreements are so short that legal review is usually like really fast at our partners. But yeah, I hear you. It's the timelines have really gotten, you know, earlier and earlier for getting financial assistance projects submitted, while our funding comes later and later every year. So we are actually now getting into crunch time for the next couple of months. So yeah, keep your eyes out for opportunities. But yeah, I will continue working with folks to try and give you as much time as possible.
Brian, do you want to say a few words about the self-assessment?
Yeah, I can do that. Let me, I think I have a couple more slides. Let me see if I can share my screen on that. Yes, that one. Okay, yeah, so as you've heard earlier in this call, we're coming up on our 5-year renewal next year, when our current cooperative and joint venture agreement that governs the CESU expires. So the renewal process is designed to just be sure that the terms of the joint venture agreement were met and that all parties want the CESU to continue. There's also an external review of the program that's built into the renewal process. So there's going to be a series of deadlines coming pretty fast in early 2024. And I'll be working with Elin and others at the host university team, as well as the federal agency representatives to get as much work on the renewal done ahead of the deadline as we possibly can. The first deadline is for development of a list of CSU projects from 2019 through 2023, and that's going to be drafted by the federal agency representatives. Soon after that, the host university and non-federal partner self-assessment is due. So that deadline also includes submission of a letter of intent to continue with the CSU, as well as the final list of CSU projects, as well as the list of partners that are interested in continuing with the CSU. So about a month after that, the federal agency representatives and the external reviewers have to submit their reports and recommendations. And then assuming that everyone agrees with the continuation of the North Atlantic Coast CESU, a new cooperative and joint venture agreement will be circulated for signature prior to the expiration of the current agreement in June. So it's a pretty tight turnaround, as per usual, as we've been discussing. We have to wait until this fiscal year is over before we can really get too far into the reporting. But then basically within 6 months, we have to have everything completely wrapped up. So I did want to say just a few words on what the non-federal partner responsibilities are during this process. So first, each of the partner has to respond positively to the host university to let them know that they want to continue being part of the CSU. As part of that response, they'll need to provide some up-to-date information about technical and admin reps. And then the other lift there is going to be to review the list of projects that are awarded to their organization and make sure that they alert the host university if there are any missing projects. Some of the agency representatives don't have a good list of CSU projects, so this is really important in making sure that projects don't fall through the cracks. As part of this process, we definitely encourage you to take advantage of that CSU projects database. Using that database is going to greatly facilitate creating a project list and providing details needed in the assessment report. I will say that for my part, I'm planning on, as we get this database launched, I'll be doing data entry for the, just to get shells of projects entered for the ones from the Park Service, just since I know Park Service is a big part of, a large proportion of the CSU projects. I want to make sure that the projects I'm aware of get started and entered into that database, and hopefully that'll help out all of you at the partners. And then just another plea for photos and products in that projects database. Those really help with the renewal and outreach efforts, and also help, as I mentioned earlier, help the agency staff locate good cooperators. I also wanted to just, at the bottom of this slide, there are some questions that have to be answered during this renewal process. and providing your feedback on these questions is going to be really helpful for the host university to put together the renewal document. So I think that's probably enough there. Does anyone have any questions about this process? We'll be definitely getting more. I know Tom releases the guidance in what, September, October, maybe October. But I just wanted to give you guys a heads up on what's coming.
Thanks, Brian. I think we'll be very busy in the October, November, December, January timeframe.
Yes. So much for holidays.
Exactly. So today's meeting, I believe, was our annual meeting for our CESU. And way back when, in the very early days of the CESU, this was an in-person meeting. And we were considering whether it would make sense for the 2024 meeting to be in person. The one really big issue here is that we don't have any funding within the CESU to fund an in-person meeting. So it would basically mean that each institution would have to, be committed to fund the participation, because we do span a very broad geographical area. So it's hard to know. There's no good location that every partner would be able to just do a day trip to attend the meeting, for sure. So I know, but there's so few of us left on the meeting now. Jackie had a poll, so I don't know, Jackie, you could put up the poll anyway, and people can vote. But I think we will send out an email after to poll to see what you guys think, if you think an in-person meeting would be a good idea. I'm also thinking, that I thought today was extremely educational, and I see in the comments that people seem to have appreciated the information provided, I think, especially by Tom and Brian. And I'm wondering also from the group, does it make sense to meet, have a 2, maybe 3-hour meeting once a year, or I don't know if we meet twice a year, or would you want to have shorter, maybe quarterly meetings? So that might also be something we could put out to the bigger group when we make our email request or to the group.
To that?
And if you have any comments, those are definitely welcome.
Should be up now. Let me know if you don't see it.
So while you guys are filling in the poll, I guess I'd like to thank all of you for participating, and especially to those of you who stayed with us for the full 2 hours. Thank you for taking your time. Thank you again to Tom and to Judith and Brian, Jackie, and the people who really contributed to this meeting. I really appreciate all of you. So I don't know, Tom, do you have any last minute things to say?
Well, I did not mention during my comments, thanks to Judith for her involvement in the CESU program for so long. She's really been influential and a steady, kind of a steady voice in the whole CESU directors group over many, many years. And it's, very much appreciated. And, certainly miss her involvement going forward. And FYI, Judith, I just got an email from the Department of Interior asking about your response to your SEER program. So I'll have to touch base with you on the side about that, because I guess the DOI is developing some funding related to that. So that's promising. Anyway, but anyway, I just want to say that, and then welcome Elin to you, and then Brian, of course. And again, I'm available if anybody has any follow-up questions. Please feel free to reach out. And it might behoove us, Brian, to get together with Bruce and have a conversation related to the project tracker at some point.
Yeah, about how to connect those, sure.
Yeah.
Sounds great. And yeah, I also wanted, while Judith is still here, thank you so much. You know, I've really, you know, I came on as an acting, you know, back in about a year ago, and just, you know, being able to meet with Judith regularly and just talk about the CSU and the vision and how important it is, it just really made a huge impact on me, and is definitely guiding a lot of where I'm going as I take on this position permanently. So thank you so much for the mentorship.
Thank you, guys. So Judith, you started us all off. Would you like to close us out too? I see you've typed some comments in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, I will just make a couple of quick comments, which is that you have a great team here going forward for all of you. And I really am a strong advocate of the CESU. I think that the entire national network is really one of the best organizations that we could possibly have to deal with a lot of the issues that we're facing with the environment and with cultural artifacts, et cetera. I think it's a terrific organization. And I have not worked with anyone that I haven't enjoyed the process, both within our own North Atlantic coast as well as nationally. So you're a great group. Encourage people to get involved, particularly there's tremendous value for students, graduate students in particular, but certainly occasionally the exceptional undergrad is receives great benefit from it. Certainly early career faculty, there's an opportunity with the CESU for them to get involved early on when they're struggling to put together all of the credentials they need and the accomplishments they need to have listed in order to earn tenure. So it's a terrific thing for them. For faculty who are on the other end of their career, it's also a wonderful way to wrap up with the wisdom that often comes with years of work in the academy. It's also a great network for people in NGOs, Aquaria, any number of environmental organizations that belong to the CESU. So I just wish you all luck with it, and it's been a pleasure. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Judith, and thanks everyone. We'll see you on email and so forth.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.